Með ykkar leyfi þá ætla ég að skipta yfir á ensku. Iceland has become a leader in travel and tourism growth, topping many must-see lists of travelers across the world. Growing excitement is bringing in rapidly growing numbers of visitors, not to mention investors in infrastructure. But is there a risk of too much of a good thing? How can Iceland ensure that the destination proactively grows in a way that stays true to its strategy, sensibilities, style, and the spirit of the people of Iceland? Bringing global learning to the stage, Anita Mendiratta's keynote addresses this critical question. Anita is a trusted strategic advisor and 5-time author in tourism development, working with governments and businesses across the globe, including being special advisor to the Secretary General of the United Nations World Tourism Organization, who will be on official visit in Iceland, or to Iceland, next week. Please welcome Mrs. Anita Mendiratta.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and a very sincere thank you from my side. I must say to Runar and Splanborg and Landsbank, I'm incredibly honored to be here. I'm excited to be here because before I'm a consultant and advisor and all that grown-up stuff, I'm a tourist. And to look out into this crowd and to have this opportunity is an enormous blessing. So with that in mind, I ask you all to have your business cards on the table, but turn them over for a moment. And I need you to please walk through the next 30 minutes with me as a traveler, not just as a professional in the industry. But before we do that, I want to spend 30 to 60 seconds of my presentation acknowledging the audience itself. Very rarely in the world am I blessed to speak with an audience that has come here proactively to look at an industry that has become one of the greatest forces for good in our entire world. It's incredible to look out and see all the way back to the room. We have business leaders, we have the media, we have academia, we have people who choose to be here because they recognize the value of the industry. That is fantastic. And as was mentioned in the introduction, which I'm very grateful for, one of my bosses, the Secretary General of the UNWTO, which is the United Nations Agency for the Promotion and Development of Tourism, is coming here on official visit. And I have been having great fun with him by sending him photographs while I'm here, whether it was from seeing the Northern Lights 2 nights ago or horseback riding yesterday, to give him a sense of, you can't believe how magnificent this time is going to be. You are at the top of the list of many countries in the world in terms of where travelers want to go. That is an incredible blessing. The challenge is, how do we guide your growth into the future? And what can we do to make sure that everything you do for tourism serves you first, serves Iceland first, puts locals first, and never, ever, ever makes you feel like you are selling your soul? We have leaders like WOW Air, like Iceland Air, who are absolutely working tirelessly, and as you saw from the last presentation, incredibly courageously and innovatively to reach out to the world, to bring them here. That's remarkable, because so often countries need to be convinced to be able to put this focus on the future. You're doing that. And that's remarkable. So I'm going to take you through the next now 27 minutes of walking through what's happening in the industry. You've heard the statistics, you've heard them, I've heard them slightly in English, you've heard them in Icelandic, about how much the growth is taking place here. What is unbelievable is the speed at which your numbers are growing, the double digits that you are showing. Because ultimately what's happening in our world is that the world is in our hands. Our generation lives in a generation that has never, ever been seen before. The world is open to us through airlines, through currencies, through language, and simply through opportunity. We have an incredible blessing. Aviation, if we look at it, 3.1 million people are traveling every single day. 3.1 million. I always argue that with the exception of Iceland Air and WOW Air, not necessarily 3.1 million pieces of bags show up when those travelers travel. But 3.1 million people are traveling every single day. That is incredible. This past year, 1.2 billion international travelers traveled around the world. People woke up in the morning, grabbed their passports, grabbed their ambitions, whether it was seeing the Northern Lights or coming to Iceland and creating business opportunities. They got up, went somewhere with a dream. And they were able to do that because of our industry. The domestic number of travelers is usually 5 to 6 times that number. So again, staggering in terms of the growth that we're seeing. As Dr. Rifi, the Secretary General, who will be here next week, who you will all adore when you hopefully get a chance to meet him, he was saying that in the last 40 years, we've grown from 189 million people traveling to 1.8 billion by 2030. That is a revolution. But it's not just a revolution from the point of view of the physicality of people moving from one side of the world to the other. It's a revolution in how our world is coming together and how it's thinking. Now, this is a slide that usually gets me into trouble, so I'm going to have to caveat it. But the bottom line is this. Travel and tourism is not just about the tourists. This is why I love this industry. It's actually got a little bit to do with the tourists. The value of our industry goes so far beyond that. It's the ripple effect. Now, if I give you a tiny example of that, this morning, hypothetically, I get up in the morning and I go down to the restaurant before coming here and I say, I'd like, please, a boiled egg. Follow the journey of the egg. The egg order was taken by a waiter in the restaurant. In addition to the waiter, there was someone at the front check-in that brought me to my table. It's 2 people so far. The order for the egg goes to the kitchen, which is received by the cook. The cook goes and collects the egg from the stocks. There's a stock keeper. There's an order taker in there somewhere. There's someone who got up in the morning and delivered the eggs to the hotel. The delivery person picked them up from a farm, from a farmer who had his people go and actually collect the eggs from the busy little chickens overnight, hatching the eggs. There's at least 7 to 8 people being touched or touching that little egg experience. So it's all about the ripple effect. It's all about the egg. What is the life cycle of every single thing that we touch in our industry? Which is why our industry is the 3rd biggest sector in the world. If we look at how it creates jobs, how it creates opportunity, we are the 3rd biggest sector in the world, over and above automotive and banking. Importantly, in the economic downturn, we're the only sector that did not require a bailout. We are one of the quickest sectors to bounce back because the ability for people to enter the sector itself, play a critical role, become productive and feel meaningful, that is why our industry is a force for good. We are responsible for 1 in 10 jobs around the world. 1 in 10 people wake up every single morning and have a sense of, I have something to do. I have something to contribute. And importantly, tomorrow's going to be a good day again because I'm going to have my job tomorrow as well. 1 in 10 people around the world. Now, we in the developed side of the world look at that with one set of eyes. You've also got people in the developing sides of the world. That's what's so critical, that we have the ability through our industry to touch 1 in 10 lives around the world. If we look at it, 10% of global GDP comes from travel and tourism. That's a staggering amount of money that simply comes through the desire of someone to take the money that they've saved, get on a plane, go somewhere else, and spend it in a place that they never knew before. We are the most remarkable industry when it comes to people voluntarily wanting to give up their time, wanting to give up their money. It's almost counterintuitive in today's day and age. But this industry has a very special force within it, which is a force to give, not just to take. If we look at it, we're 9% of global investment. We're also very important in terms of looking at the opportunity here. Iceland is remarkable in how it has grown. We look at the stats, we've heard the stats this morning. Your statistics are remarkable. And they are showing a feverish growth that is taking place. So if we look at it, how you've grown from 490,000 people to 1.8 million in 6 years, 33.9% of GDP, 33.8% of employment. 1 in 3 people in Iceland has a job because of travel and tourism. And look at it, 20% of investment itself. What I find really important about this industry, though, is that the stats are great. But if you look at a country like Iceland, like Cuba, like Myanmar, countries that have come at the top of the hot places to go in the world, what is it about that that's so special? An example recently was in Cuba when a year and a half ago I was there on a UN conference. Now, confession, I as a Canadian had never normally wanted to go to Cuba, because when I was growing up, Canadians all went to Cuba and they'd go to the resorts and you'd have large numbers of Canadians in the same places having the buffets. Admittedly, they'd be fine, many of them were in the pool, they had Canadian flags on their head, and they were drinking beer at 10:30 in the morning. That was not my idea of a holiday. So I avoided Cuba. But then about a year and a half ago, we had a UN conference that was taking place in Havana. And I went a few days before, like I did coming here, and I wanted to get a sensitization. And I remember seeing on the news something about Carnival Cruise. Carnival Cruise was basically having its first cruise ship coming in from the US into Cuba in 40 years. And I was standing on the shore at the hotel, and I looked out, and oh my goodness, there's a cruise ship out there. And I got quite teary, because I love what I do at a cellular level. And I asked the tour guide, please will you take me to the port? So he took me down to the port, and the ground was shaking with excitement, because Cuban-American families were coming back together. Carnival Cruises, and full credit to them, they refused to actually bring the cruise in unless they were permitted by the Cuban government to bring Cuban Americans back. Now, these are Cuban Americans who had not been in Cuba since they were teeny tiny, and they were ripped apart from their families, and for the first time they were going home, because for them Cuba was still home. What was amazing about standing there, though, was that for all of the media and all of the excitement, for the first time, the world cared about Cuba. That was incredible. A country that for almost 40 years had been pretty much locked out, they felt their worth again. There's an element of that here in Iceland as well. You went through a terrible bruising in the early 2000s when it came to the economy. That doesn't just hit us in terms of our pockets. It hits our sense of worth. Suddenly now, everyone wants to go to Iceland, which is remarkable, because suddenly now, you've become the golden child. That sense of excitement about who one is, that sense of identity is remarkable. And that's where we can never forget the power of our industry is not just in the numbers, it's in how it makes people feel, not just as travelers, but as the people who live in the destination, where everyone now wants to go. Ultimately, that creates competitiveness. We've seen how remarkably the airlines are supporting the destination, how businesses, how the banking institutions are. The fact that Landsbanken is doing this conference is incredible, because it says that this is an institution that is proactively keen on making sure that tourism works for all the people in Iceland itself. What we also find quite fascinating is that at this time, it's the first time that the global community, beyond us in tourism, are appreciating the value of travel and tourism. We live in scary times right now. We live in times in which one president tweeting can actually cause a very scary scenario of potential war on the other side of the world. We are more in a world that is pushing people apart than it is bringing people together. But travel and tourism is the only sector in the world that actually encourages strangers to understand one another. It is an industry that goes far beyond simply, as I said, the travelers, which is why this year, 2017, is the United Nations International Year of Sustainable Tourism for Development. It is the only time in which our industry is celebrated right through the UN system, whether it's UNHCR, UNICEF, the World Food Programme, whatever it might be. And as was said clearly by Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, we need to harness the power of travel and tourism to bring people together. Because when we talk about sustainability, it's not just about green. It's economic sustainability, it's cultural sustainability, it's social sustainability, it's environmental sustainability, but it's also importantly spiritual sustainability. It's people feeling their worth. It's people desiring to connect to one another. It's people wanting to make a difference. Because our world is not going to stop moving. Our ability to travel has become a way of life. It's become an expectation. Why? Because we can. There's a reason why young women from Shanghai jump on an airplane and go all the way to London to stand at a Louis Vuitton line in Harrods to buy the handbag that they could easily have bought in Beijing or in Hong Kong. Why? Because they can. Because through travel and tourism, we bring our greatest desires to life, and we bring them to other people's lives, as we'll see.
My name is Ratnesh. I'm originally from Mumbai. I like to call it Bombay because I grew up there. What do I remember from Bombay? Well, playing in the streets, taking the local, jasmine gajras in the flower market, and my mother praying in the morning. You can move thousands of miles away, but these images, they are always with you.
I'm Alka. My full name is Alka Rani Dubey. I'm 61 years old. My son is Ratnesh. He's staying in New York. First, when he told me he wanted to go to the US, I felt very excited. But when the moment came when he was leaving India, that time I was really very nervous and quite heartbroken, I must say. Today, British Airways has given me a seat on a plane. It is for my son's favorite dish, okra paratha. They will fly it to America and surprise him in his apartment. I think this will make him come home and visit his mummy. I, like every mother does, I used to experiment with different things, putting in his tiffin box. Most of the time, the other vegetables, they will return from the school untouched. But whenever I am giving okra, it is finished. I asked him, why you like okra the most? He said, Mama, my teacher has told the child who eats okra becomes best in his mathematics. My son is progressing day by day. His dreams are getting fulfilled. And his happiness is more than what I ever want for him. When he will look at the tiffin box, first he will think from where has it come, but once he tastes the food, he will know it is made by his mummy. And I am sure he will start searching for me in his apartment. I miss him so much because when he left home, he was hardly 17 years old. And from that day, he did not return home. I miss my son.
My mom had cooked my favorite meal, and she was waiting for someone from British Airways to pick up the tiffin carrier. So they sent me. After flying from New York to Mumbai, there I was, walking to her door, smelling her cooking. It was an incredible feeling. Sometimes, even when you know what's going to happen, you cannot even imagine how it's going to be. I got the opportunity to see my mother in a way I'd never seen her before. She looked lonely. She looked like she sounds over the phone. I just wanted to run out and give her a hug. Mommy, I'm here.
It was a great moment. It was a family moment. Even his dad was there. We all three of us sat, we talked. And I didn't ask him, when are you leaving? I said, I will not ask you today. Let this question be for tomorrow.
Love that ad. I mean, I say that was produced about 5 years ago by BA, and I always have to smile because there's a certain point in the advertisement where you can actually start seeing not just the women but the men grabbing for a glass of water because suddenly they get that little choke in their throat. British Airways produced that campaign, again, 5 years ago. What is the one thing you did not see in that ad for British Airways? An airplane. And to me, the most powerful thing about that ad is something that all of us need to embed in our hearts, regardless of what airline we work for, regardless of what bank we work for, regardless of who we work for. It's never just been about the flying. That is the heart and the heartbeat of our industry. People don't come here just because they want to see the sky turn green, just because they want to see water burst out of the ground. Something got them to choose Iceland first, and to choose Iceland now. That is remarkable. The question, though, is how do we make sure it's a choice that's not at any cost for us? And this is where we flip the presentation a little bit to talk about how do we protect ourselves from overgrowth. The word over-tourism, which Skift created about a year ago, has now become very closely linked to Iceland. How do we manage what was said in the video by the tourist about the only disappointing thing was there's so many tourists? How many tourists saw her and thought, good Lord, there's so many tourists running around? Tourism is our blessing. How we manage it is critical. It's not the problem. Over-tourism is not the problem. It's the symptom. The cause is all about management. And this is where the opportunity unlocked, particularly for Iceland itself. Because we need to make sure that when we look at ourselves as the people of Iceland, we're proud of what we see. And we're proud of what we've done with this industry, which is bringing us so much in terms of revenues, investments, jobs, and ego. That has a role to play. Tourism will continue to grow. People will continue to deal with the busyness of it. But we need to make sure that what we are doing is not hurting anyone or anything. Because ultimately, people come with a dream. They come here to find something. They don't want to find something else. A small, tiny example was yesterday. I had the great, great blessing of going horseback riding in the morning. And I must say, your Icelandic horses are the most caricature-filled horses I've ever seen in the world. They were fantastic. And while we were out riding, it started to rain. And as much as Mother Nature has played a little bit of a dance with my traveling and my touring in Iceland itself, as we leave the stables and the rain starts coming down, as I've heard several times here, if you don't like the weather in Iceland, wait 5 minutes. And sure enough, 5 minutes later, the sun broke through. And what happens when you marry sunshine and rain? The perfect rainbow came out, and then another one. If there's one thing that I've seen here more than anywhere else in the world, it's rainbows. But importantly, you have to look for the rainbows and not get caught up by the rain. So what we need to make sure we do is look at how do we create those rainbows even if it is a day when the rain is falling? What are the pieces that need to be put in place? First and foremost is the insight. Why are people traveling here? They're not traveling here because it's affordable, or it used to be seen as very affordable. That's not a motivation for people traveling somewhere this far, often this damp and this cold, to do something this natural. What is the reason why they travel? Like British Airways discovered, it's never just been about the flying. To run an entire campaign about Visit Mum, what was the insight there? Everyone is missing someone, somewhere. So go now. Go for the hug. Go for that moment. Go for the milestone. Because we have no idea if we'll have the opportunity again. What is the insight as to why people come here? I am confident it's not about the price. I'm confident it's about something different. Interestingly, people are coming here very much as well, as she said, as a woman said, because it's so quiet. One of the pains the other night when I went to see the Northern Lights was it was beautiful, and it reminded me, I spent 22 years in Africa. It reminded me of going on safari. You can't just show up and Mother Nature switch on the lights. You have to wait, and you have to wait, and you have to wait. And in there comes the hot chocolate. In there comes the schnapps. In there comes the loss of feeling in your fingers and toes. And then suddenly something happens. And the sky gets that color. I'm sure, who here has not seen the Northern Lights? I'm really pleased to see no hands out there. As you all know, the sky goes a light gray, as if the lights of the city are projecting, which they're not because you're so far out. And then the flash of green happens. And it was incredible to see. The best thing to do was put the camera down because the sky just starts to dance. It was just spectacular. But then behind me, which got me walking almost onto the road of the lookout area, were all of these tourists exclaiming their excitement. And I just thought, can we turn the audio button down, please? The beauty of Iceland is the silence, because in that silence you feel the awe. What is it that you can offer people that they can find nowhere else in the world? Once that is identified, how do we invest in it? How do we invest in making sure that the experiences that we offer are indeed projecting who we are? How do we get people out of the main cities? Dispersion is critical. Every single destination in the world has the same five strategic criteria. The number of arrivals, but not just number of arrivals, the yield. How much are they actually spending and bringing in? It's making sure they disperse around the destination, getting out to other areas. We need them to come all year round, and we need them to come back. Those 5 criteria must guide every single policy we put in place and define the infrastructure. So for whatever's being built here in Reykjavik, what else do we need to do to get people out elsewhere in the country itself and to bring them back? How do we get the integration? What I'm seeing here in this room, the number of links across the private sector, academia, media, and government, that is remarkable. You are so far ahead of so many countries because proactively you choose to work together. That is not an assumption everywhere in the world. That is remarkable. What is your identity? What do you choose to be known for? People don't want to go to a destination halfway across the world to find McDonald's and Starbucks on every corner. That's not why they're coming here. Your language is a part of your identity. Your cuisine is a part of your identity. Your wool, all of these textures, that's your equity. That's why people are coming to travel. Does there need to be accommodation for new cultures, new people? Absolutely. Do the translations. But don't lose your soul in the process of going from one language to another. You are Icelandic and it needs to be celebrated. And that's why people are coming here. A small example of a destination which has always been seen to be around the world as magnificent, but has really suffered from growth, is Bali. How many people here have been to Bali on holiday? A few hands speckling up. The challenge with Bali is one thing. You see the brochures, you see the resorts, and they look magnificent. They're gorgeous. When you're at the resort. To get from Denpasar Airport to the hotel can be a nightmare. To go to some of the beautiful ruins is only to find that they've been ruined because they're being crawled on by hundreds of tourists. One of the reasons why Bali has suffered was the Bali bombings. When the bombings took place, the traditional travelers, especially from Australasia, disappeared. So they had to bring people back. So they cut their prices. When you cut your prices, my point of view, often you cut the manners of the people who come and travel. It's been very difficult for them to build that back up again. So as much as they had an identity of luxury and beauty, they've sold their soul by trying to get the numbers back. We don't bank arrivals. We bank the earnings and the jobs. That's the sensitivity. On the flip side of that, we've got a fantastic, fantastic example in Rwanda. Now, one of the things, you live in Iceland, so this is not one of your top lists of places to go, but please, at some point in your life, make the trip to see the gorillas. It is just staggering. The gorillas, which live in the triangle of Uganda, Rwanda, and the Congo, are incredible. And you literally have a situation where you're sitting without any 4x4, any rifle, nothing. You're sitting as close as, sorry, I'm going to turn you into a gorilla. You're sitting as close as you are, and you've got 200 kgs running right at you, because the silverback needs to know that you are submissive to them when they first see you. Otherwise, they won't let you see your family. So you pay your license fees, you trek for 2 hours into the mountains to finally find the silverback, be charged, and then you get access to the family. Gorilla trekking has become an incredibly important part of the economy in these 3 countries. So they thought, brilliant, why don't we increase the number of tourists to get more money in? Because it's perfect for the Rwandan Development Board, it creates jobs, it allows the local communities to grow. And interestingly, the original poachers of gorillas have now become the Sherpas and the guides, so it's actually protecting the ecosystem. But if you bring in more people, you're going to scare the gorillas away. And all the money that Rwanda could make from the gorilla tracking disappears because the gorillas just say, this is not a safe place, we're going to go live in Uganda. And they don't need passports and visas, they just walk across the border. So Rwanda recognized, if we want to make more money from gorilla tracking, we're not going to increase the number of tourists, we're going to increase the price of the license and make sure that that respect remains. That model is continuing to work. They are continuing to grow in a way that ultimately makes sure what we have in populations of tourists, we don't want to lose our attractiveness because we allow the numbers to increase in a way that's not healthy. Because ultimately, in tourism, it's not about the value of tourism. It's about the values of tourism. And this we can never, ever forget. Which is why, as part of this year, the UNWTO has created a campaign which lets people be reminded it's not just what we as the industry do to protect our industry. It's also about the tourists and their need to continue to travel, continue to enjoy, but never ever stop respecting the people that let us into their homes. And with that, I say thank you very much and God bless.